I've always been a calm person, skeptical of ghost stories or tales of terror. I believed that most of these stories were made up to scare people, especially the ones told at my school. So, when I started hearing some students talking about the banging locker in the second-floor hallway, I didn't think much of it. It was the typical story to scare newcomers. My school was old, with long, dark hallways, especially at night, but I never had any problems staying there after school hours. I was in my final year and part of the theater group, so it was common for me to stay late for rehearsals or to organize materials after everyone else had left. I liked the silence and the feeling of being alone in the school, but that night, something strange happened. It was a Friday, and we had spent the afternoon rehearsing for the end-of-year play. The rehearsal ended around 6 p.m., and everyone started to leave. I stayed behind to tidy up the costumes and put away some materials in my locker. It was almost nighttime when I realized I was the last one left. While I was locking my locker, I heard a strange noise coming from the nearby hallway. At first, I thought it was someone still there, maybe one of the janitors, but the sound was different. It was like locker doors were being opened and closed repeatedly. The sound was distinct, and I could hear the echo of the bangs reverberating through the walls. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the wind passing through the hallway. I continued packing up my things, but the noise got louder. Now it was rhythmic banging, as if someone was deliberately opening and closing the lockers, but without much force. I didn't know what to think. I grabbed my things and decided to take a look to see what was going on. When I reached the hallway where the sound was coming from, I was faced with a scene that made me freeze. There was no one there. The hallway was empty, but the lockers, one by one, were banging. The doors were opening and closing in a rhythmic manner, as if invisible hands were moving them. My heart started racing, and a growing fear crept over me. This wasn't the wind. There were no drafts here. The locker doors were banging as if something or someone was playing with me. For a moment, I stood there, paralyzed, watching that surreal scene. I wanted to believe it was some kind of trick or that maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But the bangs were real. The sound was loud, and I could feel the vibrations on the floor, as if something heavy was moving through the lockers. Finally, I gathered the courage and shouted, "Who's there?" My voice echoed down the empty hallway, but there was no response. Only the sound of the banging continued. I don't know why, but I started walking towards the lockers, thinking that maybe, if I got close, the doors would stop banging. The closer I got, the louder the bangs became. When I finally reached the lockers, one of the doors suddenly stopped banging, left slightly ajar. That's when I realized something was deeply wrong. The silence that followed was worse than the banging. I was only a few inches from the locker, and all I could hear was the sound of my own heavy breathing. I decided to turn around and run. I didn't want to know what was inside that locker, nor why the doors were moving on their own. I grabbed my backpack from the hallway and ran towards the exit as fast as I could. The sound of the banging resumed, now louder and more erratic, as if something was angry at my escape. When I finally made it outside the school, my heart was pounding and my hands were shaking. I looked back at the second-floor windows, and for a brief second, I thought I saw a shadow pass by. But I didn't stay to confirm. The following Monday, I tried to forget what had happened. I returned to school as if nothing had changed, but the feeling that something was wrong never left me. I didn't tell anyone, thinking they would laugh at me or say I was imagining things. But a week later, I heard other students talking about the locker banging in the hallway at night. They had heard it too, but no one knew how to explain it. To this day, I don't know what caused it. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks, or maybe there's something in that school that we'll never fully understand. But one thing is certain, I never stayed at school after sunset again. And whenever I walk down that hallway, I avoid looking directly at the lockers. I always liked my school's library. It was the most peaceful place I knew, where I could isolate myself, study, or simply read in peace. The tall shelves, the absolute silence, and the smell of old books made me feel comfortable. I was a high school student, so I spent much of my free time there, especially during breaks and after classes. I was never afraid of being alone in that space, until something strange happened and completely changed my relationship with that place. It all started on an ordinary afternoon. I had stayed after classes to review some texts and prepare a project. It was almost 6 p.m., and the school was practically deserted. The librarian told me she would leave early and asked if I'd be fine alone until the janitor closed the school. I reassured her, saying I would soon finish what I was doing and leave as well. As soon as the librarian left, the silence in the library became even heavier. I felt completely alone, which, until then, didn't bother me. I was focused on my studies, immersed in a book, when suddenly I felt a slight discomfort, as if something in the atmosphere had changed. It wasn't a noise, but more of a sensation, a presence. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just fatigue. I kept reading, but something kept drawing my attention to the far corner of the library, between the more distant shelves. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement, like a shadow passing quickly. I thought maybe it was the janitor getting ready to close up, but when I looked directly, there was no one. My heart started beating a little faster. It must have been my imagination, I thought, returning to the book. But the feeling that I was no longer alone persisted, as if something was watching me from between the shelves. It was hard to concentrate with that growing unease inside me. Then I saw it again. This time it wasn't just a flicker. The shadow was there, clearly standing in the aisle between the shelves. It was a dark, tall figure, with no distinct face or body, just a blotch of darkness in the middle of the library. For a second, I thought it might be a reflection of something, maybe the lights creating some kind of illusion, but the shadow was moving slowly, as if it was watching my every move. I stopped breathing for a moment, trying to process what I was seeing. What could that be? My mind raced in all directions, searching for a rational explanation, but nothing made sense. The shadow moved from shelf to shelf, gliding without making a sound. The terror inside me grew, and I didn't know if I should scream, run, or just stay there, frozen. I decided I needed to get out of there. I quickly closed my book and packed my things into my backpack with trembling hands. Every movement I made seemed to echo through the library, as if the silence was amplifying every sound. But the shadow didn't stop watching me. It was there in the corner, still now, staring at me, or at least that's what it seemed like, since there was no face to identify. I walked toward the exit, trying to stay calm, but my whole body was on high alert. The shadow didn't move as I walked, but the feeling of being followed was unmistakable. The library door was just a few steps away, and all I wanted was to get out of there as fast as possible. As soon as I opened the door and stepped into the hallway, I felt a wave of relief. The air outside felt lighter, as if the tension had stayed trapped inside. But when I turned to close the door, I took one last look into the library, and that's when I saw the shadow again, standing in the middle of the book aisle, watching me still. It didn't follow me, but just knowing it was there sent chills down my spine. I ran through the school corridors and out the main door without looking back. My mind desperately tried to find an explanation. Could it have been the light, my imagination, or maybe exhaustion playing tricks on me? But deep down, I knew what I had seen was real. That shadow was there, and I had no idea what it wanted. The next day, I returned to school as usual, but something inside me had changed. When I walked past the library door, a shiver ran down my spine. I didn't have the courage to go back in alone. I told some friends what had happened, but no one believed me. They said I was exaggerating or that it was just my tired mind playing tricks. But I knew what I saw, and since that day, I've never been able to see the library the same way. The shadow is still there, I'm sure of it. And every time I walk past the library, I feel that, somehow, it's still watching me. I've always been passionate about basketball. Since I was a kid, it was my refuge, a way to forget about the world and focus on something that made me happy. When I started high school, I took my practice more seriously, and because I didn't want to lose my rhythm, I stayed almost every day after classes, practicing in the school gym. The best part was that, after a certain time, I had the place all to myself. The silence of the empty gym, the echo of the ball bouncing on the floor, and the sound of it hitting the backboard were almost meditative to me. In this routine, I spent many afternoons alone, perfecting my shots and moves. Everything seemed normal until that night. A night I will never forget. It was a Friday. Everyone had already gone home, and I had stayed a little longer as usual. The gym was completely empty, illuminated only by the fluorescent lights, which made a low, constant buzzing sound. The school was silent, and the only thing I could hear was the sound of my basketball bouncing on the floor. After about 40 minutes of practice, I was sweating a lot and decided to rest for a bit. I sat in the bleachers with the ball by my side, breathing deeply and enjoying the silence. That's when I heard it, a laugh. At first, I thought it was some noise coming from outside, maybe someone passing by the gym, but the laugh was clear, and it echoed inside the gym itself. It was a high-pitched, childlike sound, as if a kid was playing. I froze, trying to figure out where it was coming from. I looked around, but saw no one. The gym was completely empty. I tried to push away the thought that something strange was happening, convincing myself that my mind was playing tricks on me. Maybe it was the echo of some external sound reverberating inside. But the laugh sounded again, this time louder and closer. My skin began to prickle, and a chill ran down my spine. There was no denying it. The sound was coming from inside the gym. Slowly, I stood up, still holding my basketball, trying to stay calm, but my heart was racing. "Who's there?" I asked, my voice trembling, but no sound answered except for the echo of my own words. The laugh echoed again, this time accompanied by the sound of light footsteps, as if someone were running in the bleachers. I looked around but saw nothing. The feeling of being watched grew stronger by the second. It was as if something, or someone, was playing with me, hiding in the shadows of the gym, waiting for the right moment to appear. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't just stand there, but every move I made seemed to amplify the sound of the laughter. It was as if it was everywhere, filling the gym with an invisible presence. I closed my eyes for a second, breathing deeply, trying to convince myself that it wasn't real. Then the laugh changed. From a childlike giggle, it turned into a lower, darker laugh, almost cruel. It wasn't the sound of playing anymore. It sounded like mockery, as if it were laughing at me. My instincts told me to run, but my body was paralyzed with fear. Finally, I managed to move. I grabbed my basketball and started walking toward the exit, taking quick, hesitant steps. With every step I took, the sound of my sneakers on the floor echoed along with the laugh that seemed to follow me. I was almost at the door when something else happened. The basketball, which I had tucked under my arm, was violently yanked from me. It bounced on the floor once, twice, 3 times, before stopping in the center of the court. I looked back, frozen. There was no one there. No hand pulling the ball, no movement other than it bouncing on its own. The gym was empty, but I could feel a presence, something that couldn't be seen, but was there. The laughter abruptly stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the sound. I knew I couldn't stay there a second longer. I ran to the door, leaving the gym without looking back, and refused to return that night. In the days that followed, I told the story to a few friends, but no one believed me. They all laughed and said I must have been tired, that it was just my imagination. But I knew what I had heard, what I had felt, and since that night, I never practiced alone in the gym again. The place, which once brought me peace and comfort, was now a reminder of something I couldn't explain. A laugh that echoed through the walls, an invisible presence that seemed to be having fun at my expense. And every time I walk past the gym, I feel that same chill run down my spine, as if somehow it's still there waiting to laugh at me again.